Welcome to another episode of Voices Unveiled, the podcast where we explore topics related to bias, voice, and social justice. I'm your host, Maria Abid, and in today's episode, we will delve into the complex concepts of bias and voice and its intersection with colonial legacies, white supremacy, Eurocentric curriculum, racial bias in research, and the pursuit of social justice. To set the stage, let's start by defining bias and voice. Bias is prejudice for or against one person or group, especially in a way that is considered unfair. Voice is a particular opinion or attitude expressed. In addition, to guide us through this discussion, we'll be drawing on from insights provided by two thought-provoking articles, Intersectionality 101 by Ahir Gopaldas and Towards a Decolonizing Kinesiology Ethics Model by Janelle Joseph and Deborah Krieger. These articles shed light on the intricate web of biases that shape our perspectives and the urgent need to challenge them. So let's begin. Colonial legacies continue to exert a profound influence on our world today. These legacies have perpetuated power imbalances, with Eurocentric ideologies serving as the basis for dominant narratives and systems. In the article by Gopaldas, Intersectionality 101 explains how colonialism and imperialism have shaped our understanding of race, gender, and social class hierarchies. Also, in the course module, we learned that in 2019, there were only 7.9% of physical therapists in Canada that identified as racialized and 2.9% that identified as Indigenous. This highlights that race disparities in the education and healthcare systems. Disparities like this occur in many forms and persist due to biases. This shows how that colonialism established racial hierarchies that favored white Europeans and marginalized indigenous populations as well as racialized populations. This created a system of power that continues to shape our institutions, cultural norms, and even individual mindsets in an inhumane way. As a result of this historical context, white supremacy became deeply embedded in various aspects of society, including education. Eurocentric curriculum, a manifestation of this bias, centers around the experiences and contributions of white individuals, often at the expense of other cultures and perspectives. This curriculum perpetuates the erasure of diverse voices and reinforces stereotypes. Eurocentric curriculum limits students' exposure to diverse perspectives, reinforcing the dominant narrative of white superiority. It is crucial to challenge this bias and create inclusive learning environments. Challenging biases in education requires not only diversifying curriculum, but also critically examining the research that informs it. Racial bias in research has long been a concern, as it influences our understanding of various topics, including health psychology and social sciences. In the article by Dr. Joseph and Dr. Krieger, it highlights the need to address racial bias in the field of kinesiology, as it affects the well-being and experiences of marginalized populations, since it was structured through historical colonial systems. Research biases have perpetuated stereotypes and contributed to health disparities among marginalized communities. To rectify this, we must challenge the underlying assumptions and power dynamics in our research methodologies. As a woman of color, I really appreciate physical culture courses in the U of T kinesiology program, as it aids in identifying biases and helps in overcoming and challenging said disparities. Overcoming biases in research requires an intersectional approach. Intersectionality, a term coined by legal scholar Kimberly, recognizes that individuals' experiences are shaped by overlapping systems of oppression based on race, gender, class, and other factors. Capaldi emphasizes the importance of applying an intersectional lens to dismantle biases. Intersectionality recognizes that social identities are interconnected and cannot be examined in isolation. It is through this lens that we can uncover and challenge biases that perpetuate inequality. So, how can we work towards social justice by addressing bias and amplifying marginalized voices? The first step is acknowledging our own biases and reflecting on how our biases may influence our perspectives and actions. It is important to recognize that bias is not limited to overt prejudice, but can manifest in subtle ways, such as unconscious bias. By increasing our self-awareness and engaging in ongoing self-reflection, we can actively work to challenge and unlearn these biases. Ahir Gopaldus emphasizes that amplifying marginalized voices is crucial for achieving social justice. By centering these voices and perspectives, we can challenge the dominant narratives and empower those who have been historically marginalized. This involves actively seeking out diverse sources of knowledge, engaging with different perspectives, and creating platforms that uplift marginalized voices. Amplifying marginalized voices requires active listening, empathy, and creating spaces that prioritize their experiences. It is through this process that we can dismantle the structures that perpetuate bias and exclusion. Furthermore, Joseph and Krieger propose a decolonizing approach in kinesiology ethics to promote social justice. This approach involves acknowledging and addressing the historical and ongoing impact of colonialism, imperialism, and white supremacy within the field. By centering the experiences and knowledge of marginalized community, kinesiology can work towards a more inclusive and equitable practice. Decolonizing kinesiology ethics involves challenging the power dynamics within our field, recognizing the lived experiences of marginalized communities, and actively engaging in partnerships and collaborations that promote social justice. Achieving social justice requires a collective action. It is not enough to address bias and amplify marginalized voices as individuals. We must work together to challenge systemic structures that perpetuate inequality. This includes advocating for inclusive policies, supporting diverse representation in positions of power, and actively participating in movements that fight for social justice. In conclusion, bias and voice are deeply intertwined with colonial legacies, white supremacy, Eurocentric curriculum, racial bias in research, and social justice. To challenge these biases, we must acknowledge the historical context that shaped our society, critically examine the dominant narratives, and actively seek out and amplify marginalized voices. By doing so, we can work towards a more inclusive, equitable, and just world. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Voices Unveiled. We hope this discussion has shed light on the complex issues surrounding bias and voice. Remember, change starts with awareness and action. We encourage you to continue exploring these topics and engaging in conversations that challenge the status quo. Until next time, take care and keep questioning.